painting by a woman created such a sensation that a policeman had to be stationed in front of it when it was first exhibited in 1874. The Roll Call Crimea was Elizabeth Thompson's contribution to the annual exhibition at the Royal Academy in London. The 28-year-old English painter, who became Lady Butler when she married in 1877, was drawing attention to the horror of war and the part played in that horror by the senior ranks of the British Army. The people who flocked to the Roll Call Crimea gathered to admire the 6-foot-wide oil painting. Thompson's style endeared the work to many art lovers. They admired its heightened naturalism and figures rendered in a variety of poses and characterizations. Thompson's painting depicts a moment during the Crimean War, which began in 1853. Britain and France took on the Russians in the Crimean Peninsula on the north shore of the Black Sea and emerged victorious in 1856. The war had been over for almost 2 decades by the time Thompson created her masterpiece in 1874. But some of the controversies arising out of the conflict still simmered. During the war, the Times newspaper and the Illustrated London News sent correspondents and artists to the battlefield. Instead of sending back glowing accounts of the bravery of officers, the correspondents and artists focused on the suffering and heroism of the ordinary soldier and the inefficiencies of those in command. Reports were published, for instance, of the rank and file being sent into battle without guidance while officers played chess in their tents. Soldiers often miss out on food supplies. Cholera was rampant, and disease killed far more men than the enemy did. The British people were horrified. They demanded military reform. In Thompson's day, military reform was still on the parliamentary agenda. Thompson chooses an ordinary moment. A group of Grenadier Guards is answering the roll, being called by a sergeant. The scene slowly unfolds from left to right. A mounted officer on the far left towers above everyone else, a clear sign of his rank. His pose recalls monumental equestrian statues glorifying military leaders. The snow under the horse's hooves is soaked with blood. The red of his uniform links up to the red of the sergeant's tunic. Notebook in hand, the sergeant is calling the roll. The painting undermines this quiet moment with a growing realization of horror. In counting the survivors, the sergeant is also calculating the number of dead. Vultures gather overhead. The sergeant talks to a guardsman standing next to him. He supports a soldier who rests his hand and head on his shoulder. Another weary soldier, with his arm in a sling, is using his rifle as a crutch. A red-bearded guardsman, with his head bandaged, stares wide-eyed into the distance. In front of him, a grey-faced soldier has fallen to the ground, possibly dead. One of his comrades bends over and reaches out, trying to rouse him. Beside him, a soldier adjusts a bandage on his wrist. A younger soldier leans on his firearm, his face buried in his arms. A bearded soldier pats his head. In front of this soldier, an abandoned helmet lies in blood-stained snow. The ragtag group of soldiers curls away on the right. In the distance, a snow-covered hill looms over an army encampment. Traditional military art did not record reality. It glorified the heroic actions of an individual of lofty rank. Thompson's painting stands some of the traditional military compositions on their heads. She does this in 3 ways. First, showing an officer overseeing exhausted and dying men was one way of representing a scene of enemy captives. In that type of composition, the officer and the men are on different sides. But in Thompson's painting, the British soldiers, ostensibly victorious, are depicted like the defeated enemy. A second tradition involved depicting soldiers from the artist's side as dead tired to remind the viewer of atrocities committed by an enemy. In that tradition, the conquering officer on horseback is one of the enemy. In the roll call, however, the place of the enemy is taken by the mounted British officer. A third type of composition shows the exhausted soldiers as victims of the weather. In 19th century Romanticism, humans were seen to be at the mercy of nature. When one of Thompson's predecessors, J.M.W. Turner, wanted to show humans defeated by nature, he painted tiny figures tossed about on land and sea by wind and snow. If Thompson had wanted to blame the Britain's sorry state on the cold and alien conditions of Crimea, she could easily have made her point by following the path trod by Turner and others. But Thompson's men are not small in relation to their setting, and there are no fierce skies or gales to suggest the wrath of nature. In fact, the setting is relatively neutral. The snow serves merely as a locating device, a clue that this is not England. In other words, Thompson lays the blame not on a beastly enemy or unpredictable nature, but on the British themselves. Thompson painted two more scenes of post-battle horror from the Crimean War, Balaclava in 1876 and The Return from Inkerman in 1877, both to rave reviews in the press. The Remnants of an Army, painted in 1879, refers to the First Afghan War in 1842. Once again, she paints the aftermath, not the battle itself. Dr. William Bryden, the only survivor of the calamitous British retreat from Kabul, arrives exhausted at the Jalalabad fort. In some of Thompson's subsequent military paintings, the pathos and protest of these earlier canvases were pushed aside by more patriotic themes.